Hello. Hello and welcome everybody to Field Service Live. Thank you for joining us. I'm your host, James Leichter. Thanks for coming back. If you're new to the channel, if you like what you see, please hit that subscribe button and that thumbs up button. That really helps us with the YouTube promotion. YouTube takes us more seriously. The more likes we get, the more people that subscribe. It really helps us out, if you would, please. So I think we have a good show tonight. We're going to be talking about how to compensate technicians. Now, of course, this channel is all about the field service industry, which can be a lot of different companies. I think a lot of us think about HVAC, plumbing, electrical. Certainly I do. Appliance, commercial refrigeration. Those are all field service companies. Any company that drives a truck, has a truck driven by a technician, goes out to a home or a building and does work as a field service company. And tonight we're going to talk about how to compensate technicians and installers, and we might even talk about how to compensate maintenance personnel if you have people that are dedicated to maintenance. So let's first talk about why I have these two bottles on my table here. As you may remember, if you've been to some of the prior shows, we have been acknowledging, thanking, and toasting our brothers and sisters in Ukraine. And I do mean brothers and sisters because although we may not be related, they are fighting a proxy war for the West. And this isn't a political station, but this is just to acknowledge what's going on in this world. It's a very serious, sad, ominous thing. And the least we can do is say, thank you to Ukraine for doing what you're doing. Now, usually, my engineer Colin and I, we share a sip or two of Ukrainian vodka. This time, I thought I would introduce the Ukrainians to our favorite spirit, or at least mine, and that is bourbon and whiskey. In the United States, we sell almost $4 billion worth of bourbon a year, if you can believe that. That's a lot. And bourbon was actually made an official thing by the United States Congress in 1964. The United States Congress made it an acknowledged special product, unique product of the United States, and it's protected. It can't be made anywhere else. You can't just call something bourbon. Bourbon, to be called bourbon, and by the way, the bourbon name was first recognized in the 1850s. No one really knows where the name came from exactly. If someone knows better than I do, please put that in the comments. It became widely accepted in the 1870s to be called bourbon. And bourbon has some rules. It has to be distilled in the United States of America. It has to be made out of 51% corn at least, and they can use other things like rye, but 51% corn. There's actually no aging requirements of bourbon. None, which is kind of surprising. Surprises some people. There's more to that. Hang on. It has to be barreled in white oak barrels, new white oak barrels, but there's no rule on how much time they spend in there, so you could pour bourbon in these white oak barrels and pour it right back out into the bottles and call it bourbon. But there is something called straight bourbon, and straight bourbon has a 2-year rule. So all the same rules, but it has to be aged 2 years in those new white oak barrels. Also, to be called straight bourbon, which is my preference, it cannot have any added coloring, flavoring, and you cannot add any other spirits to it to call it straight bourbon. And then there's bottled in bond, which actually is my favorite after straight bourbon. Bottled in bond is straight bourbon, but there is a 4-year aging requirement. So bottled in bond is usually your best deal when you want to get bourbon. Now, I have a bottle of Basil Hayden's bourbon here, and I also have a bottle of Catoctin Creek whiskey. Now, this is whiskey because it does not have 51% corn. It has rye. It's a rye whiskey. In fact, it's all rye, if I remember right. All of it is rye. And this comes from Virginia. So this is an American product, and I thought I would share it with the Ukrainians who I've been drinking their vodka Colin and I have been drinking their vodka the last few weeks, haven't we, Colin?
Yeah, it's good stuff.
So you grabbed the Catoctin, didn't you?
Yep.
All right. You poured yourself all that, didn't you?
You trying to get me in trouble? Don't the boss see that?
All right, let's give it a try.
We're both having it neat, by the way.
Yeah, yep, having it neat. Now, I'm not a bourbon or whiskey snob, but I do like to put it in nice crystal. We have Waterford Crystal here. Smells good.
Does that bottle say that they used charred oak staves? That tastes like a stave to me, not a barrel.
No, it
I'm
does
wondering.
not. It says, and I'm not sponsored by these folks at all, but if they wanted to send me like a free bottle or a barrel or something, I would take it. It says, proudly distilled by hand in copper pot stills. That's what you have, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
In the rolling foothills of the Blue Ridge Mountains. And that is about it. Cask Proof Edition, rye whiskey. What do you guess, if you didn't read the label, if you didn't see it, what would you guess the proof is?
90.
116.
Wow.
Yeah, 116. So, by the way, fun fact about bourbon, it has to be at least 80 proof. When it goes into the bottle, it can be as high as 125 proof. When it's distilled in that copper pot, it can never get over 160 proof. So it's neat that there's these rules on what constitutes being able to call your spirit bourbon. When it comes to whiskey, by the way, there really aren't that many rules. It's just a distilled alcoholic beverage made from fermented grain mash, and that's about it. That's about the definition of whiskey. We
could make whiskey with cornflakes.
Yeah. Have you?
Well, kinda. I used just flaked corn.
Flaked corn.
So it just wasn't the kind that you pull out and eat with your cereal. I didn't pour milk over it, but I bought 50-pound bags of flaked corn.
Flaked corn.
Yeah, which is a little lighter than what you would get, from your cereal, I guess.
What's the strangest thing that you've put in your whiskey?
I don't know. I personally like a lot of corn, and then I like using barley and rye personally.
Yeah.
I mean, the rye is where you get the spice, and then the barley just kind of adds that extra back end. I think all three of them together, and I know that there are some bourbons out there that are using wheat, which I never tried that. But there's some wheated bourbons out there that are really popular. Larceny, have you ever had that?
I have.
Yeah, that's one of my favorite, and it's real charcoal, dark, kind of like what we just had. That tastes like that barrel was extra burnt.
Yeah.
And I like that flavor. I just didn't expect that it was going to be that robust. It was like way down there.
One of the neat things about whiskey, and by the way, there's a comment on there from Susan. In 1840, it was officially named bourbon. Huh. I thought it was like 1870 or so, but that's good. I mean, I just drink it. I'm not a historian.
Susan knows best.
Yeah.
She's Googling.
That's right. Yeah, she's got a tool I don't have, Google. One of the neat things about whiskey that I like, and then I'll move on to compensation, is that you get to do whatever you want with it. You can put crazy things in it, but one of the best things I think about whiskey is how they will put it in maybe a white oak barrel and age it for a while, and then put it into, say, a cherry barrel that was used for sherry or wine or something like that, and it takes on just really cool flavors when you start moving it from different barrels.
And that goes both ways. So now these wine manufacturers are buying the bourbon barrels because they can't be used again, and then they're taking their wine and doing a 6-month soak, and then it's a cab with bourbon barrel flavor, and it's really amazing.
Yes, there used to be a day where those barrels were cheap. They were trying to get rid of them. They made tables out of them and all kinds of things. Now they're making really good money selling their barrels because, as we pointed out, you cannot reuse a barrel to call it bourbon. It has to be a new white oak barrel, charred.
That was a fast 10 minutes, by the way.
Yeah,
look
at
that.
I know it was. I know. That's what
Talking about liquor.
When you're drinking at my house, you look at the clock and it's 1:30 a.m. and you're like, "Oh, I got to go to work tomorrow. I got to go to bed." Okay, so let's talk about compensation. We have technicians and installers. Let's first talk about technicians, HVAC, plumbing, electrical. What I'm seeing, if you're interested in my background, by the way, just check me out at mrhvac.com, and you'll see that I have a long background in the HVAC industry. I work with a lot of companies around the country. I see a lot of things. I talk to contractors every day, even on vacation. So I'm basing this on a lot of experience. Technicians are being paid more and more like lawyers and architects. We haven't seen such wage inflation with any other industry except maybe engineering, software, mechanical, electrical engineering fields have seen huge wage increases. HVAC, plumbers, electricians sure have. HVAC has the most. So the days of paying technicians, 20 an hour are gone. 15 an hour certainly are gone. Technicians, good technicians, not parts changers, but good technicians are getting in the $25 to $32 an hour range, and the benefits are even getting better and better. The days of reducing benefits and getting cheap with the benefits and cutting corners on the benefits, those are gone because everybody's trying hard to get good people and then hang on to them once they get them. So technicians, a good technician around the country are getting about $100,000 a year. They'll get a lot more in high cost areas like New York, Los Angeles, things like that. And here in the Midwest, we're in Kansas. We're just outside Kansas City. We're actually in Lenexa, Kansas. Around here, technicians are getting in the $27, $28, $29 an hour range. They're getting very good benefits, and there are, on top of that, performance-based incentives. And those performance-based incentives could be selling service agreements, having a high billable to unbillable ratio, meeting certain sales goals, performance goals. There aren't really any standard key performance indicators or performance goals out there. I've seen lots of different things in use, but one way or another, you have to get your technicians close to that six-figure range if you're going to be competitive, give or take about 20%, depending on where you are in the country. The same is true with installers. A common way to pay installers now is to give a two-person installation crew, to give them anywhere from $800 to $1,200 per system changeout. So in other words, you would give them $800 to $1,200 to change out a system, and that might take 2 days, maybe 3 days at the most. But many two-person installation crews are doing 2 complete changeouts in a week and getting anywhere from $1,600 to $2,400 flat rate for that. Now, what I mean is, no matter how long it takes them, whether they get into overtime or not, they're paid that flat rate fee, and they're paid that as employees, typically not as subcontractors. You generally wouldn't get away with paying them as subcontractors because of many different rules I won't get into tonight on this show, maybe some other time with an HR expert. But you have to be very careful about paying people as 1099, if you know what I'm talking about, as a contractor. Most of the time they're an employee, especially if you have significant control over how they dress, how they act, what time they show up, etc., then they are most likely an employee. So installers are making in the $100,000 range as well. Again, that's qualified. Now, I said a two-person crew. I've been real careful not to say a two-man crew because thankfully more and more women are getting involved in this industry, but according to my research, only about 4.5% of our techs are female. We can do way better. 51%, almost 51% of the population is female. We're always complaining about not getting enough technicians. We have to get ladies interested in this industry. Certainly we have to get young men interested in this industry because it seems like few of them want to work with their hands anymore. They got these little baby hands that get hurt easily. But sorry, if you have baby hands, no offense. But we have to get women involved in this industry because that's going to open up, almost 50% of the population that we don't have now. So getting back to the two-person crew, usually it's a lead installer and a helper. It could be two installers, two capable installers, but typically it is your lead installer and a helper, and the helper is tomorrow's lead installer. That's how you're training the person to become an installer, and that was me. That was me shortly after high school. I worked with a lead installer, and I was the apprentice. Literally, I was an apprentice under a welfare program, working as an apprentice, getting compensated by the government or partially compensated by the government. And I was tomorrow's lead installer. So that's a good way to train people to be installers, give them access to a lead installer, and then pay that group, pay those two people, say $800 for the system changeout. Maybe it's $400 for a condensing unit. Maybe it's $750 for a furnace, $1,200 for both. You have to work that out. But the split could be something like 60-40, 65-35. That would depend on the skill level of the helper. As the helper gets better and better, they'll get a higher part of that split because, of course, they're getting done faster. You could also pay the lead installer something less, like $750 for a complete system, and then you could pay your apprentice, your assistant, an hourly fee of some kind, an hourly wage. And it's hard for me to give advice on that because it would vary so much since they are not ready to do installations on their own. So installers and service technicians are going to be in the 100 range. They're going to be approaching $100,000, but certainly 75% of that money, 70% of that money might be guaranteed, but a good 25, 30, 35% of that should be based on hitting performance goals.
I got a question.
Sure.
So obviously where we are, we're in a major metro. I mean, when I say major metro, we have football team. And there's other small cities. Do you still pay your guys that if you're in a metro of, let's say, 20 or 30,000? Small town.
Yes, you're going to pay pretty close because right now people will get up and move. They'll leave that smaller town or they'll drive further to get paid a lot more. Okay. So you're going to be close. Now, you might be 20% less. You might have somebody making $100,000 in one place and maybe 40 miles away, they're making 80, but they're not making 50. They're not making 60. It's going to be within a 20% range. And that's more of a now thing than it used to be, Colin, because it used to be that there was a wide difference, but it was easier to find technicians back then.
Gotcha. Well, I was just wondering if somebody's out there listening, they may think that, well, I'm in a small town and I'm not going to pay my guys that kind of money, but you're right. Like, why wouldn't you move? It's a big difference.
Right. Yeah, and people might be thinking or saying to themselves, I can't afford to pay that much. I will not pay that much. If you don't have to pay that much, then don't. I mean, if you're not having any trouble getting and keeping good people, then you don't have to pay that much, and you shouldn't, because wages are market-driven, just like the cost of furnaces and toasters and cars and everything else. So you don't have to pay that much unless you have to pay that much. But if you're having trouble getting and keeping people, understand that now more than ever, and it's always been a problem in our industry, but now more than ever, skilled tradesmen, tradespeople, skilled craftspeople like HVAC, plumbing, electrical especially, are super hard to come by, and you're paying more and more for them every day. It's weird because I can remember getting into this industry when I was, I think it was 19. I think I was 19 years old when I got that job, 19, 20, something like that. And back then, it was really hard to get people. I mean, I heard complaints all the time about how hard it is to hire technicians. And it never, in my lifetime, and that was many years ago, it never got better. It just got worse. So I don't picture it getting better in 5 years or 10 years. I just see it getting worse for many reasons, one of which is that, again, young people would rather touch a keyboard than touch a hot piece of metal or cut their hand on a screw. They don't really like working on things like they used to. cars are not something that you can easily work on, at least not like you used to. So they're not growing up perhaps working on cars like I did. And the transition was kind of natural. My hobby was electronics, mechanics, go-karts, anything with an engine, a car, anything with electricity. So it was easy to get into the HVAC, plumbing, electrical world just because I was used to getting dirty. I was used to getting hot and sweaty and my hands cut open. And, back then, many of you can relate to this. You cut your finger, and what did you do? You grabbed a napkin from a fast food restaurant like Burger King or McDonald's, and you wrapped it around there, and you got some electrical tape and wrapped it around there, and the whole thing got blood-soaked, and you just kept working, and you might add some tape. But there's people now that would just freak out. If they had that kind of cut, they would freak out about it. They just couldn't continue the day, but I bet many of you have done that. That's why, one of the reasons why it's really hard to get and keep good people. So we're paying them a lot more. But paying them a lot more is not the end all. You have to be a better employer. You're going to have to be more of a head coach than a boss. The days of being able to threaten people, you do this or you can just get out of here, those are gone for the most part. And there may be times where you need to do that. You've got the wrong person, you need to get rid of them. But you better be careful about making those threats because they're not under a contract with you, right? Most of you, I would guess, they're not under a contract, so they can leave. And non-competes and things like that, they don't work anymore. Most courts don't care about those. They're totally on the side of the employee, and they probably should be.
Well, now there's reputation stuff too. So if you're a bad employer, it'll, there's things that people can go look at and go, oh, that place gets like 2 stars, and most of these people are saying management's horrible, or you know what I mean? And then you're like, yeah,
you're right.
No, thanks.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, certainly in my companies, and this is not my job. This is my not-for-profit. This is my not-for-profit thing at night. But in my regular job, which I don't pimp on the show, my regular job, we pay a lot of attention to our ratings, not only by customers, but for employees, because, heck, it's easier to find a customer that is an employee, right? If you're an HVAC plumbing company, you might have a demand service tech that can generate $250,000 in sales, but not many customers generate $250,000 in annual sales, do they? But a lot of us put way more energy into going out and finding a customer that might be worth $5,000 a year than we do an employee that might generate $250,000 a year.
Good point.
Right? So think about that. Tons of energy needs to be put into the employee. You're better off, and it's not great to do this, but you're better off firing a customer than you would be a good employee. I mean, if you're going to side with anybody, if the employee is not wrong, you're going to side with the employee because they're a whole lot harder to get.
Makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
Really.
Yeah. People don't think of it like that. I know guys, Colin, that they give out their cell phone numbers to the customer. They'll go to the customer's house at 10 p.m. They'll go on a weekend, at night, you name it. I mean, they'll bend over backwards to try to make a sale or keep that customer happy, but they don't give a crap about the employee, or at least it doesn't seem like that to the employee.
Mm-hmm.
They wouldn't take calls in the middle of the night from an applicant, right? Can you imagine giving your card to an applicant, writing your cell phone number on the back of the card and say, call me 24/7 with any questions? I mean, people aren't going to do that. So they have to, though. You have to. You've got to start doing that, or you're not going to be able to get and keep great people. What I was going to say earlier is you have to act like a coach more than a boss. You got to be a coach, a mentor, and you have to coach these guys and gals. And you have to have regular meetings. I know bosses, I know owners that don't think they need meetings. I see my people all the time. Well, head coach of the Kansas City Chiefs, where I come from, he sees his players all the time. But you think he doesn't have meetings? You think that they don't have meetings? Well, of course they do. They have meetings all the time. And they practice, which is the same thing as training. So they have meetings, they train, which is practice, and then they go do their job. And if you think about it, their job is really just a small part of their week. And it's not quite the same as a contractor, field service contractor, but it should be in more proportion than it is now, meaning we should be spending way more time training and coaching and mentoring and evolving our coworkers. And the best way to do that is through meetings. And meetings involve training. And we don't do, our industry, we don't do enough of that. We don't have enough good meetings, and we don't have enough orchestrated training. I mean, well thought out, well planned out training.
Well, I'm going to yank you back to pay.
Yeah. Well, yeah. So I wanted to make the point. It wasn't just compensation. We're here to find out how to compensate people. It wasn't just about compensation.
Yeah,
we have to do more to keep people. Yeah, there's two sides of it. Now, that takes care of installers, service techs. Let's talk about some common incentives. Most companies give, say, $15 if they sell a service agreement, and that would be $15 per system. So it'd be an HVAC system, for example, $15 per system. Some houses have 1, 2, 3, 4 systems, give $15 per system. You might give a plumber, for example, $20 to sell a disposal, or $20 extra to sell a water heater. You might give that HVAC technician $35 to sell a condensing unit, $50 for a furnace and a condensing unit, or something like that. It should be enough that the employee really appreciates it and it makes a difference on their paycheck, but it shouldn't be so much that it would create a conflict of interest or that you would be embarrassed to tell your customer about it. So pay them bonuses and incentives that you would be willing to publish in the newspaper. That's the test. I know there's not many newspapers left, but I'm old.
Publicly.
I'll
say publicly.
Yeah, publicly. I guess I got to quit saying newspapers. I'll be saying Yellow Pages next. But you have to be comfortable that it would be published publicly on the internet, newspaper, billboard, whatever, how you pay your people. And if you don't mind that being made public, then you have a good compensation system. But you have to weigh that with being competitive with all the other companies that are going to be coming up with their own methods to attract your people or at least your candidates. So those are some common incentives. Service agreements are my favorite incentive because you should be selling service agreements. That should be your top priority. I don't want technicians to stop being technicians and just be undercover salespeople pushing equipment. I don't like that at all. They should be technicians. And being a technician, being a good technician, means sometimes you repair it, sometimes you recommend replacing it. Either way, it's in the best interests of the system and the consumer. But I don't want to pay them such a high commission and put all these rules on them about turning these demand tickets into sales calls. We can't do that. And I see so many companies putting tons of pressure on technicians. They're not even technicians anymore. They're just secret, undercover ninja salespeople trying to push equipment. Don't do that. Colin, do you have any final thoughts or questions you might want to add to this?
So let's say, what should a plumber make annually? Give us a window.
Yeah, you're looking at anywhere from 70 to even 120,000 a year for a plumber.
Gotcha. And then what about apprentice programs?
Apprentices can be anywhere from, they don't make hardly anything, $10 an hour, which isn't bad, but today it doesn't seem like that big a deal, to maybe $15 an hour. The apprentice really has to get to an entry-level tech position before they're getting 16, 18, 19 an hour. Gotcha.
And is there like a base salary that people get? I know you gave like system money, but what's the standard? Do they get $15 an hour plus all of these incentives when they go into the field? Drive times?
It can vary so much. Ideally, you would pay someone making $100,000 a year, 15 an hour. And the rest of it would come through bonuses and incentives that are reasonable and fair, not pushing equipment when they don't need their equipment changed out. But you want to tie as much of their compensation to performance as you can. Like, heck, just showing up for work 5 days a week ought to give you a bonus. There ought to be an incentive for being at work 5 days a week.
Is that bad? Guys don't make it all 5 days?
Oh, yeah. It's all the time. I mean, the work ethic is getting worse and worse all the time.
That's crazy. I would have never guessed that.
Oh, tardiness is ridiculous. Attendance is ridiculous. People have a sniffle and they can't go to work. And it gets worse all the time.
Hmm.
So tie as much of their compensation as you can to performance and incentives, but you won't avoid paying that kind of money for a skilled electrician, plumber, or HVAC technician, or refrigeration mechanic for that matter. Heck, you could be in the kitchen remodeling, doing kitchen and bath remodeling right now, and you can't find anybody. Many of those companies are 1, 2, 3 person operations because they can't scale their business because it's so difficult to find craftspeople that can do the work. There's just not enough money.
So essentially, they should you want it to be show up to work for the entire week performance, and then low essentially salary money to really make. Yeah, you can make $100,000 a year. You're going to have to work and sell.
Yeah,
and go in and look at equipment and make suggestions to replace.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You might say, for example, look, I pay $15 an hour, but if you show up for your entire shift, every shift, work the entire day, every day, it's $18 an hour. And if you are 75% billable, 25% unbillable, then it's $20 an hour. And if you generate $750 gross profit dollars per person day, it's $23 an hour, and so forth. And you get $15 for every service agreement system you sell. Just goes on like that. So tie as much of it to performance as you can. But remember, the key here is that you have to be careful about turning them into salespeople. They need to be technicians. But you can, if you just Google my name, James R. Leichter, put the R in there because there's this sexy James Leichter out there that's way better than me. And
You're saying that.
Yeah, we're not related. He's just so cool. He's like James Bond guy, And so put the middle initial in there. You'll see all kinds of articles that I've written about this topic, performance-based compensation and coaching versus bossing people around and so forth. If you want to know more, just Google my name and put payroll or performance-based comp or technician compensation after my name, and you'll find a lot of info. All right, so I want to leave one final thought on this whole compensation thing, and that is it is going to continue to be difficult to get and keep people. It's not going to get any better. It's really important that all of you out there have a thorough understanding of what it costs to do business. You should understand your financials like you understand tools in your toolbox. You need to know what you can afford to pay, what benefits you can afford, because you're going to have to be keeping your eye on your payroll costs like never before. And the only way to do that is to thoroughly understand what payroll is costing you by department. So you need departmentalized income statements. You need an income statement for your service department, an income statement for your install department, commercial versus residential. You need an income statement for your maintenance division, etc. And you have to understand what your costs are so you know exactly what you can afford to pay and how much you can afford in benefits. Also, this is important because unlike ever before, you're going to have more and more trainees. You're going to have more and more people working in the field who don't know anything, that are learning the trade, and they will hopefully be tomorrow's technicians at your company. You're going to have to take a risk hiring these people. That's how I got started. You're going to take a risk. They might leave you, but if you take care of them and you give them little reason to leave, then they'll stay with you at least long enough to make it worth your while. But the only way our industry is going to start solving the lack of technicians is we need fewer owners. Too many people leave a bad employer to start their own company. Many people do not start their own company. This is important. Write this down, Colin. Many people start their own company not because they are entrepreneurs, but because they were sick and tired of working for the person they worked for. They felt like they weren't getting a fair shake. They quit, and they started their own company, but it wasn't because they were big entrepreneurs and they had a drive to run their own business. They just quit because there was no reason to stay. We have too many owners that are not good at doing what they're doing, and they should be working for somebody who knows how to treat people right. And number two, our industry needs to do a better job of apprenticeships, training people, training tomorrow's installer, tomorrow's technician. So think about that. All right, that's it. I'm going to let everybody go. I'm going to finish these 2 bottles and walk home. Hey, I appreciate everybody being here tonight. Again, Field Service Live is all about taking care of the field service industry. I'm your appreciative host. I enjoy doing this. I love having you here. I'm James Leichter. Check me out at mrhvac.com. I look forward to seeing you again. Good night.